this next section, we want to continue talking about factors that contribute toward the development of these kinds of problems. In our last session, we did talk about the role of attachments or relationships, relationship bonds, that feed security and identity in the undeveloped soul, enabling it to arrive at a place of maturity, so that healthy heterosexuality can be achieved. Now, I want to add something here that is very important related to our last discussion, and that is something highlighted in the life of Christ. He never got married, and he never had sex, yet he was, I would say, probably the ultimate example of a healthy heterosexual. Heterosexuality is not just a matter of attraction to the opposite sex and wanting to have sex with them. It is more about maturity and security in your gender role. Because when you are mature and secure in your gender role, you cannot help but be a healthy heterosexual. Perhaps that is the ultimate way we need to define healthy heterosexuality, wouldn't you say? Someone who is mature and secure in their gender role. They are therefore able to give themselves, not take, not dominate, but serve. When asked in a survey of what do you think makes a healthy man desirable, it wasn't good looks or machismo that were listed, but here are some traits listed about a man that men and women will admire as a man. A healthy man is a man who is comfortable and secure around others, especially those who are very different from him. He is comfortable and secure around others, particularly those who are different than he is. A man who has qualities that others admire is a man who is a man who has initiative. He takes responsibility. He is not passive, but he takes responsibility, not only for making things happen, but also when he fails, he is able to admit his shortcomings. Only a secure man can afford that loss to his ego in a public confession of failure. That's the kind of person people admire. Additionally, a real man is a man who has self-control. Not the man who is the brawler in the barroom, not the man who wants to bed with every woman, but the man who has self-control, particularly over his appetites and urges. That's the kind of man a woman can trust and respect. He is a man who is likely to serve rather than dominate with his position, to lead by example, and to serve rather than dominate. Now, these are just some qualities of a healthy heterosexual man that men and women admire. And you know what? Jesus probably modeled every single one of those traits. But he was never married, he never had sex, yet he was a healthy man because he was confident and secure in his gender role. Therefore, he was at ease in relating to other people. He had the confidence to challenge spiritual authority rather than shrinking back from it when that spiritual authority was either satanic or fleshly and carnal like the Pharisees. But also, he could be tender and give himself in a loving way, serving way, to those who were sinful and broken and bound and oppressed. And he was comfortable to be with the hookers, and he was comfortable to be with the kings. It was a matter of confidence within. He didn't have to prove anything to anybody, especially when the devil said, prove that you're the Son of God and do this and do that. He didn't have to prove anything either. Those are marks of a healthy heterosexual man, even though he never got married, never had sex. So I wanted to highlight that before we continue on. Additionally, in my previous sharing with you, we talked about the bonding that occurs especially in early childhood. One of the situations I mentioned there was that first attachment with mommy, and breastfeeding is a typical literal, figurative, metaphorical, and absolute symbol of that kind of bonding. But now there are women who were not able to breastfeed. Perhaps it's because of time and inconvenience, or perhaps it's because their body doesn't produce milk. For whatever reason, I didn't share that model with any sense of condemnation for women who do not breastfeed. I'm still saying, though, without apology, I believe that is the model. But we live in a fallen world, and things don't always happen the way God ideally intended. So again, there's no condemnation. I just wanted to highlight the fact that the plastic breast isn't as good as the real thing. But even when a woman cannot produce breast milk, the bond can still exist because she can just use that bottle and still maintain that close intimacy with her child. So let's not think in terms of, oh, I missed the mark and therefore my child will grow up deranged. That's not my point in sharing that model, but rather it is to highlight what is suddenly obvious to us when we understand it in God's picture of bonding, relating, and how that feeds identity. Okay? Now, let's move on in looking at the issue of factors related to people's problems. We were talking in our last session also about the role that genes will play and how that will affect sexuality. But so far, genetic aberrations or problems related to birth defects do not produce homosexual people. At least genetically, that's not yet been proven. But science is still unfolding in this realm, and we've already given you rather a scriptural overview that even if science should one day find some genetic condition or situation influencing the development of homosexuality, for example, that still does not mean that homosexuality suddenly is therefore okay and that these people are pre-programmed robots who cannot help it. That is to underestimate, maybe to overestimate, I should say, the role of biology and to underestimate the other influences that do shape our lives. But let's take a look at a couple of other biological factors here besides genetics. This is your brain. And there are regions of the brain which do control sexuality, like the hypothalamic region. A study was done just related to the homosexual issue. A study was done by a gay doctor at the Salk Institute in the United States. And this doctor studied the brains of 19 cadavers who had died from AIDS. And it was noted that in those who were known to be homosexual, that a particular structure in the hypothalamic region was different than for the heterosexuals. Thus, the conclusion, which was heralded around the world, aha, see, homosexuals are born with a different brain. They develop it from conception onward, and that results in different behavior called homosexuality. Well, since you haven't heard much about that anymore, have you? Why? Because science has had a difficult time trying to replicate these findings. Secondly, because most of the people who die with AIDS, they suffer neurological damage and impairment because AIDS virus affects the brain and the neurochemistry. Add to that, we've already learned this in studying the human brain as well as that of animals. You may not be born with a different brain resulting in different behavior. That's the hypothesis of this doctor, that different brain structure results in different behavior called homosexuality. But what we have already proven in science is that if you keep doing this behavior, it will affect your brain structures. This has even been proven with little old mice, that if you pluck out their whiskers, the mouse without whiskers will not develop a certain region of the brain like mice who have their whiskers. You see, which is it? Different structure resulting in different behavior, or your behavior altering your structure? This second issue has already been well established. Additionally, there is current research related to hormonal influences on the development of the fetus. Presently, homosexual men and women are not different hormonally than for their heterosexual counterparts. In other words, if you're a homosexual woman and here's a heterosexual woman, your hormonal secretions as an adult will not be different than for the heterosexual. And where there are some minor differences in some homosexuals, we do not know whether that would be psychologically induced or whether that is a biochemical interplay with psychology and behavior, or if there is this difference in some homosexuals, it is not enough to at all in any way say, oh, you'll be gay and you'll be straight. So now the only research related to hormones is being done on the development of the fetus in the mommy's womb. Now what has been discovered is that there is a particular chemical or hormone called androgen, and the babies, male or female, receive a dose of androgen. Generally speaking, the male fetus receives a much higher wash of this chemical, and typically this will produce a little boy child who is more aggressive and mechanically focused, competitive, and physical. Kind of that typical boy stuff that we describe. That's the result of these prenatal hormones washing on the developing fetus. And yet, because it's not a perfect world, and maybe because God doesn't want everybody to be the same, we don't know which of the two that is, sometimes the male child will not get as much androgen, and he will not be as outward focused, as challenging, rough, and rowdy as the boy model that is typical. Now that does not mean he is a homosexual, but it may mean he is a little bit more femininized, because all of nature starts out female. The baby in the womb starts out female, and it is the Y chromosome that causes an otherwise female fetus to become a male. Talk about Eve coming out of Adam. Well, ever since then, Adams have been coming out of Eves, quite literally. And that's been because of the Y chromosome. And that's because babies start out female, but the Y makes them become male. So the natural state of the fetus is to be feminine without the androgen kicking in because of the Y. Then that little boy child, even if he has a genetic Y makeup, he may still be somewhat femininized if the androgen didn't kick in that dose. He will not be outward. He will not be as rough and rowdy. He may not be interested in little boy toys. This does not make him a homosexual, but here biology may have set him up to be interpreted by his culture as less than a man. And then the labeling process will begin, and then inadequacy will surface psychologically. And there we see where biology may have set up the male child to be reinterpreted wrongly. Do you follow me? What about the little female child who gets too much androgen, and she develops very typical masculinization, and she is competitive, and she is very mannish and athletic? This does not make her a lesbian. She has just been masculinized by these prenatal hormones. Now, if people begin to interpret that as lesbianism, or they begin to interpret that as tomboyishness, and they begin to label her through no fault of her own, here she begins to derive a conclusion, doesn't she? I should have been a boy, because she may hear that over and over. So here we see that biology doesn't make you homosexual in this model, but there is research being done to show here that perhaps indeed biology related to prenatal hormones could set you up for certain behaviors that will be culturally interpreted against you. Okay? Now, we do not know whether that's because of the fall, or whether because maybe God doesn't want every man to be super macho and every girl to be a super Barbie doll. You know what I'm saying? Maybe God, who likes 600,000 different kinds of spiders, maybe he also likes a variety of types of humans, which is why he also made various races. There isn't just one die-cast model. And I'm not trying to excuse effeminacy in men or hypermasculinity in women per se, but I think we need to recognize that there's just not necessarily one set type, but we still don't have an answer to the question whether it was fallen biology or whether it was by God's design that those differences occur, but still fallen culture will interpret whatever happens here and impose problems on the child. It's terribly unfair, isn't it? But that's life on the fallen planet. Moving on, let's move out of the biological realm. Oh, one last point about biology. You'll note there that I have put conditioning under the biological column. Because again, you do something like, oh, wow, I saw that pornography at the time of puberty, and that pornography really stimulated me sexually, so I looked at pornography again. And I liked the fact that when I looked at it, it turned me on and I masturbated, so then I looked at it again because I like that pleasure, and it's cheap and available and recreational and no big price to pay. And so the more you do it, and we have a bio loop, and chemically this affects your brain structure and alters it. And that's why I put conditioning under biology, because indeed your habit patterns have a very real biological component, which is why just getting saved doesn't fix it. You reap what you sow, because we are body, soul, and spirit. Now, moving on into the next column related to factors here under psychology. You see number 1 there, the setting. Then we have underneath that first home or family. Home, family. That comes under point number 1 under point 1. Point A, forgive me, under number 1, the setting. Obviously, your environment's going to affect you. There's 80 years of psychoanalytical data which underscore the fact that even in the case of homosexuality, we cannot ignore environmental influences that do affect what we perceive about ourselves. And so, certainly, the first big influence is going to be your home and family life. Point B is then your peer interactions outside of the home. As we've looked, they will shape us too. And then we have point C, your society and your culture and their values and views about things. All 3 of these points under setting will help to make you what you are. But add to that, it's not just what happens to you, it's your reaction and interplay with it. That takes us to point number 2, your temperament. Everybody who has more than 2 children will tell you that child A and child B can be remarkably different because of inborn temperament. For example, child A and child B growing up in the same home. They're approximately within 2 years of each other in age. Now that age may affect perception, but so will temperament. Daddy's away on business all the time. And child A is not a child that needs a lot of nurture, but child B is. That's the truth about children. Some are more independent and less nurture-oriented. Some are very clingy and nurture-oriented by temperament. You can't change it. You have to go with the flow and know the bent and cultivate it in that line. Now, child A says, gee, Daddy's not here. I wish he were. I really miss him, but I know he loves me, and I know that when he's back, he'll make time for me, and I'm glad. But child B says, Daddy's never here, and Daddy doesn't love me, and I hate Daddy for not loving me. And there you have a completely different reaction based on nurture need and temperament. So that brings us to point number 2 here. A, under number 2, is perceptions. It's not just what happens to you, it's how you perceive it, isn't it? Point number B there is your reactions to what you perceive. Will you be understanding and forgiving? Will you be demanding and embittered? And then point C under number 2 is the conclusions and choices that you make based on what you perceive. Daddy's not there, therefore I'm mad, therefore I reject him. We have to understand this in the clients with whom we work, because these are deep-seated beliefs that often have to be exposed and dealt with before progress can occur in their recovery. Often their conclusions are faulty as well. As you heard from my own story, I had a lot of faulty conclusions about God, didn't I? Because I didn't have understanding, and because my expectations as an immature child were unrealistic, rigid, and inflexible. And I'm so glad that God, in his understanding of this, did not condemn me, but later he did expose the truth to me. And one of the great revelations of my life was that I learned the character of God. He was not as he had been accused to me. Then, moving down here to point number 3, events. It's not just our home life and environment, It's not just our temperament and our reactions, but there are often specific events in the lives of troubled people. Now, for example, point A here under number 3. We have bonding and labeling. Did the bonding occur? Was there effective labeling that helped the child? Or was there a lack of bonding and was there faulty labeling? Point B, was there healthy identification? Did the identification transfer occur? For example, with the little boy that we talked about, let's just say that daddy wasn't there. Now, that child is not doomed to become a homosexual or a heterosexual deviant of some type. But let's just say that, okay, daddy's not there, but maybe uncle has a good relationship with little boy. Little boy transfers his need onto uncle, and that identity vacuum is filled up because of a caring uncle who's substitute for the biological father. Or let's say that there's no other close male figure, but little boy rightly models after a hero in the movie, or with maybe his male peers, or with an older brother. Again, the identity vacuum has been filled. Maybe not perfectly according to God's design, but there has been a reasonable substitute, a reasonable compensation. There are many men who grow up in the world today who do not have a good father figure. He's either physically or emotionally absent. They do not become necessarily homosexual. But that's because they might have filled up that vacuum with something else. But generally, without that good daddy bond, there is still a theme of insecurity. But it may not be resulting in some big mega life-controlling problem. Okay? So we have identification as point B under item 3, the events of our lives. And then finally, point number C, trauma. Did the child suffer trauma? Trauma means psychological injury. And here are some very big and also typical emotional injuries to the soul. Abuse. By abuse we mean psychological and physical. Then molest, which is sexual abuse. I might add that molest does not just mean penetrative sex. Even attempted abuse is enough to leave a child psychologically wounded. Uncle tried to get you, he didn't, but you're still left devastated. Make no mistake, sexual molest is not limited to penetration. It can be fondling, it can be including penetration or even attempted. But that, of course, also depends on how it was handled, whether there was support for the child, how long this attempt went on, also how did the child perceive and react to it. See, all those factors come together, don't they? So we have a molest, and then neglect. Neglect is a type of trauma. It is a form of rejection. Because it says, I didn't care enough about you to meet your needs. And then outright rejection. I like your sister more than you. Or, why don't you ever do like they do? I like them more than you because of how they do. Or, you'll never amount to anything. That's rejection. It's a form of deep betrayal, especially of the parental bond. And then other traumas include death and or separation from the parent, like through divorce. These are traumas. Interesting thing about your makeup. We've talked before, if it's true for the body, true for the soul. Now, your body is designed by God to develop, isn't it? You do not have to worry at the age of 14 whether your arm will be long enough at this stage to be mature at 21, right? You don't have to tell your body to mature at a certain rate, and you don't have to worry about that. There's a sense of auto-programming, right? That you will develop if what? You have enough nourishment, physical nourishment, and there's no major disease or injury to cripple growth. If you have enough nourishment and there's no trauma to cripple growth, you cannot help but develop, right? Similarly, your psychological, relational, and sexual development will also naturally occur through those stages we talked about if you are emotionally nourished and there's no trauma to cripple your growth. True for the body, true for the soul. So these traumas need to be understood because they often cripple our clients at the point of development when they were injured. Often our clients demonstrate an immaturity in expectation and relationships typical to the age they were when they were wounded. Intellectual development and skill continued, but relational development stopped. And they still interact in adult bodies like 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. You be there for me. You make me feel secure. You be there to make me happy. And if you're not, like an unreasonable child with inflexible expectations, I'll have a fit. And unfortunately, when adults act like that, they get into big trouble because they disobey God. They go out and have sex, they get HIV, they go out and they get drunk and have a car wreck and die. They go out and live disobediently and get into a cult and throw their spirituality into great eternal risk. That's what happens when grown-ups have a fit of immaturity. Because, see, at that level of relating to God, or maybe others, they still act very childlike. That's usually because they stopped growing at the point of their trauma. You follow me? Okay, then number 4 here is experimentation. The reason I put this as a separate column, even though it is an event or separate point, is because traumas are things that happen to you. Experimentation usually has an element of mutual consent. Okay? Moving on to the next column. Under the supernatural realm, we cannot deny the fact that we have our fallen nature. We've talked about this. Add to that, point number 2, there are demonic forces that work against us. Isn't that right? They provide for us these 3 things. Oppression, that means externally they bombard us with those darts. People will struggle sexually, in part because of that. Secondly, they can infect us. If you can be infected with germs and you're a Christian, I believe you can be infected with demonic germs too. They may not possess you and control your life, but if you can catch the flu, because it's a dirty world filled with microbes, my assumption is that demonic forces can also penetrate your barrier if you don't have that immunity up. And you can get infected. I think this often happens with Christian caregivers, and we'll talk later about this in maintaining your integrity as you care for others. Like if a doctor and a nurse working on an infectious disease ward have to be very careful in interacting with infected people who could infect them, then what about those of us, as Scripture warns, in our caring for others, we must be careful not to be entangled. Can't we get infected, or do we think we're immune? If we're so immune, why so many fall? So I believe we run the risk of infection without a good immune system functioning, and without washing off, maybe daily, from the infections of that world in which we live, because it's a fallen, unclean world out there, biologically as well as spiritually. True for the body, true for the soul. And I think often we underestimate that we can be infected, maybe not possessed, but influenced indeed. He gets a hook in there, and that hook will indeed hurt us. And then thirdly, demonic forces will offer us opportunities to sin. Even if you're not infected, even if you're not being bombarded with impure thoughts, he will still provide us with opportunities to make wrong choices, including sexual, sinful choices. Then number 3 here, you can see where people have been offered to idols. In Asia especially, there is that phenomenon of transvestism, as in cross-dressing drag queens, and there's that phenomenon of transsexualism here that is higher than for the Western world. It's very interesting that one of the prevailing deities here, Kuan Yin, goddess of mercy, is a man dressed up as a woman. Now, we don't want to overplay the role of these spiritual influences, but how many of my clients have been offered up by well-intentioned parents to the goddess of mercy, and he was given authority over that child's life. And now we need to take that back and remove it from that authority and submit it to God's authority. Okay? We'll talk more about some of this as we continue. Then number 4, there are those generational curses and blessings. The blessing of a father who loved you means that you've got love in your cup to give to the next generation. The curse of the generation before you is, if daddy didn't have love in his cup from the previous generation, what will he have to give you? And then what will you have to give the next? Indeed, the weaknesses of one generation are passed down. It doesn't have to be some mystical transference of a spirit. It can simply be a lack of love. Okay? Moving on, let's take a look now at our next overview of the client here. When people come for help, let's take a look at what we're looking at. Now, most of the people we work with, their major problem is in the soul or the personality. Even if biology influences, and even if there are demonic and supernatural forces at work, most of the people we work with have their problems rooted in the soul. And what do I mean by soul? I mean psyche, where we get the word psychology. That is your personality. Your mind, which is your intellect, your emotions, which relate to people, don't they? Emotions are about relating. I feel secure or insecure. I feel loved or angry. I trust or I don't. Trust relates to fear or peace and security. And so the emotions are that relational part of you, like your mind is the intellectual part of you. And then there is the will, which is the behavioral part of you. That's your personality there, as you see on the chart. Now, how do these work together? Like this. For example, it's time to go to church camp, and you know that when your routine is spoiled, especially through travel, you generally don't maintain your spiritual integrity in terms of prayer time and communion with God. And God knows this. And so we go through this routine. I know I should be spending time with God, but I don't feel like it, so I will not. Or, you just smashed into my brand new expensive car because you were negligent. I feel like getting out and punching you in the face, but I know I will only get into trouble, so I will not hit you. I'll sue you in court. The will is an interesting aspect of our personality because it takes what you know and how you feel and will turn that into attitude, internal behavior we call thinking, and then into external behavior. As a man thinks, so he does, which is why Jesus made a clear point that sin has its start in the heart. Sexual immorality has its core in the heart, because as you think, so you will do, which is why what you think is so important to God, and that's why I tell my clients that what you think is actually internal behavior. That's why we have to nip it in the heart. What you think is your internal behavior. And I can tell you what, externally we can be in pretty good control, but we can be involved in raging sin on the inside. And this is of concern to God, because the more you cultivate that, the likelihood will be that you will translate it externally. And then other people will suffer, not just you. Now, when people come to us, looking over there, to your right of that first model, we find that when people come for help, the mind is lacking understanding. People struggle with misconceptions and faulty expectations of God, what salvation should provide, and how we overcome these kinds of problems. So they are unequipped. They may be knowledgeable about many things in the Bible, but they do not have an understanding of how they develop this problem and what they can do about it and how God can help them. And their struggle is so much greater because of a lack of understanding. They may have knowledge, but they do not know how to apply it and how it unfolds in their lives. That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom, isn't it? Wisdom is the correct application of knowledge. And then in the area of their emotions have often stopped growing in terms of relating to others. There is injury, there is anger, there is bitterness, there is that infection there of bitterness. They don't trust, they're afraid to take risks, they don't want to grow beyond their comfort zone, they don't want to find out if God will help them do that. And then in the area of their will is weak in terms of obeying God because they don't trust Him. And their will is resistant toward taking risk and finding out a different strategy of living and loving. You follow me? Another way of looking at the client, you see down there, when people come for help, usually we have to look at these three things. Number one, down at the bottom there, is wrong behavior. Obviously, if we have somebody who comes to us and they're involved in sexual sin, we want to see their wrong behavior addressed. We want them to bring that under obedience to the Lordship of Christ. Obedience won't solve every problem. If they have emotional injuries, if they have unmet needs, if they have misbeliefs, obedience won't solve it. But has been wisely said, understanding can wait, but obedience can't, because every act of disobedience increases their risks of injury for themselves and others. So obedience is rather like checking into the hospital. It won't fix everything, but at least you're going to live and the doctors can work on you. Obedience puts you in the right place to begin dealing with your problems. It won't solve them, but at least your risks begin to diminish, because at least you're obeying God. You see, I tell my clients, you do not get healed so you can therefore obey God. You obey God, and that will release healing opportunities. Get the formula right. Now, obedience is not always perfectly achieved. Sometimes our clients, they will have failures over a 2-year period. About 50% of them will fall back into immoral patterns. But we do not give up on them. We still encourage them to get up and try again. Like a child learning to walk, they lose their balance. Every time they fall, there are consequences, but we don't give up. We encourage them to get up and go on, and eventually they generally do get their balance and grow on and begin to deal with not only what they do, but why they do it. And that's step number 2 here. We need to deal with the wrong beliefs and reactions. The wrong things you believe, and underneath that, we find the top point there, the deep needs. Needs to be loved, and wounds need to be healed. For example, a lesbian girl. She gives up her lesbianism. She's tough and butch and mannish. Not all lesbians are, but many who have been wounded and abused will be. Their attitude is, I don't ever want to be hurt again like that. I don't ever want to be vulnerable to a man like that. I reject my femininity because it made me a victim, and I'll never be a victim. I'll never be attractive to a man. So what we find here is she's given up her wrong behavior. She's no longer living a lesbian lifestyle. She's submitted that area of sexuality to Christ, but she's not growing. She comes in because she has all these internal conflicts. She feels pressured by Christians to stop being so butch and mannish. She feels pressured by Christians to date and get married. This is superficial and a lack of understanding on the part of Christians, but she still feels the pressure and she resents it. So she comes in to talk, and as the Holy Spirit directs us, and again, this is where I am not the doctor, the Holy Spirit is. At best, he may use me as a nurse. I have so much teaching in this area, I could spend 5 years just talking to people and wondering what the problem could be. But only the Holy Spirit can say, today talk about that. Or in counseling, this. There could be 50 things I might want to talk about that I may think would apply. I could probe and search and speculate, but only the Spirit of God can zero in and say, today, do that. And I'll tell you, your counseling will be productive when you let him be the counselor through you. It's not my job to fix people. That responsibility is not a burden I should bear. When the yoke begins to smash you, you're taking on a burden you're not supposed to. And so, what happens with this girl is we discover that she's been very resistant to giving up her butch and mannish appearance, because she is afraid that if she does, she will be vulnerable to hurt again. That is a misbelief, isn't it? She has not been integrated with her femininity. And see, there's where she has another misbelief. She thinks God requires her to become a Barbie doll. And that's another mistaken belief. We have to confront that one too. God does not want you to be a Barbie doll. God wants you to be comfortable with being a woman and not having to sacrifice part of your womanhood to protect yourself. You're not a little girl and a victim anymore. Well, I don't want to get married either. God doesn't require that you get married. Another misbelief that has caused her to cling to this butch mannish appearance as a shield to hide behind. because she views men as monsters. And there's another lie. Men are not all sexual monsters. God may bring into your life Christian men who will be good models of a father heart of God, or good models of pure brothers who will support and protect you and love you and esteem you. And he may even bring into your life the kind of man that you can trust and respect to the degree you will want to get married. But all men are not sexual monsters, even if some are. So you can see there are 4 major lies we've had to dismantle in her wrong beliefs and reactions, where she's tried to protect herself with this butch mannish mask and security shield. You follow me? Now she's giving that up, and it's scary because for years she's hidden behind it. I don't want to try to be a girl like that. I'm afraid I won't measure up and they'll laugh and make fun of me. There's where she needs to see that no, that's not true. Maybe cruel teenagers laughed and made fun of you, but in the body of Christ, there will be people who will support you, and they will not laugh and make fun of you, but they'll give you a safe, sheltered place where you can begin to learn to become comfortable with being a woman again. And then we deal with the real issues here in her life, her needs. She needs to be consoled over what she lost, her innocence when she was abused and defiled. And there's where we need to minister to her wounds and wash them of their bitterness and soothe her fear and give her strength and confidence to grow. That will take time, and it will happen through relationships, not just counseling. Again, counseling does not solve everything, and we'll talk later about what does work in helping these kinds of troubled people. One more model we need to look at. Here we see one more diagram of a troubled person who struggles with sexuality and relational issues. What happens is, down here at the bottom, when a child's need is unmet, and by need, this is what I mean. The need for security and identity through relationship bonding, or the need for an emotional injury to be healed. Okay? When need is not satisfied, it results in a sense of betrayal and hurt. And hurt, when it is not soothed, what happens? It becomes inflamed and possibly infected. That's when we move into anger. When children have their expectations unsatisfied, almost always their reaction, in addition to hurt, is anger. And when anger is not recognized and consoled, Daddy's sorry. Daddy didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Daddy didn't mean to be late and make you miss the party. Daddy knows. Daddy's sorry. Let Daddy make it up to you. When that hurt and anger go unministered to, then the child becomes infected with bitterness. And that bitterness will result in rebellion and deception. You weren't there to meet my need? Well, quite frankly, then I guess I'll have to meet my need my own way, and I'll go get it done my way, and if you don't like it, tough. That's the attitude in a lot of rebellious teenagers who rub their rebellion in the face of Mommy and Daddy. I don't care whether you like it. I am protesting here with my embittered rebellion against you because I want you to know you failed me. Now, I'm not justifying and saying it's right. I'm saying that is an understanding of that exaggerated rebellion in teenagers. I'm not talking about typical teen rebellion where they're growing into their own person and challenging your authority as just part of becoming an adult. But I'm talking about that hyper-rebellion that leads to real conflict, then deception, because when the kid shuts out the right path, the kid has to justify the wrong path. That's where deception comes in. You follow me? Then we go from an attitudinal problem into a behavioral problem at the point of rebellion and deception, don't we? There you begin your wrong behavior, which results in conditioning, and the more you do it, it develops into a stronghold, and that will yield a person in behavioral bondage. Follow me? That's the fallen condition. So it's very evident that we have different parts of the human condition to minister to, don't we? And that's why quick, pat little answers don't solve it. That's why going to church every week is a good thing, but it won't fix it. That's why we're going to talk in our next session about what is recovery. What can we expect in overcoming a life-controlling problem? and as responsible Christians who need to rightly represent salvation and what it offers a troubled person, we're going to look at what recovery is and what recovery is not. Because again, we deal with so many people who have faulty expectations, don't they? And we want to be able to give them something realistic and something attainable in overcoming their life-controlling problems. So this is our client overview. This is understanding why people struggle. And I hope it's given you more insight. And as we begin to talk about recovery, I hope that you'll remember sexual problems are relationship problems, and perhaps we begin to see why. And that will help set us up to understand the important role that relationships play in mending people whose lives have been broken, wounded, and wrongly conditioned. That's why we'll see all of our recovery comes down to those two important relationships with God and each other when we come back for our next session. In this session, we want to begin talking about recovery, what it is and what it is not, and what we can realistically expect Jesus to do for us if we have struggled in an area of sexual problem. Additionally, we want to know what we can realistically offer to people who have that kind of a struggle if we are the caregiver. Often there are many misconceptions. Again, a theme you've heard throughout our sharing is relationships break people, and relationships can mend and remake people. Before we go into the discussion of recovery, I want to highlight the role of relationship and why it works and what relationships provide that will help in the recovery journey. If relationships are so almighty important, and apparently they are, because again, highlighting the two greatest commandments, which are relationship-based, what is it about relationships that are so crucial? Let's talk about that right now. Over here, you'll see this first diagram, 3 appetites that every human has. Obviously, we have an appetite for food for the body, and all over the world, people know how to satisfy that appetite. especially here in Singapore, which is why I have to wear black all of the time. And in addition to our physical appetite for food, an appetite you never completely satisfy. You have to continually satisfy it to be healthy. It is not an option. You eat food or you feel pain. You eat food or you get sick and your development is crippled. Eating is not an option. One meal won't do it. You must eat all the days of your life. Unfortunately. Or fortunately. Food for the body, and in this spirit, we have an appetite for truth. This is not something I can outrightly prove, but I believe it is something I've deduced from things that are so obvious. For example, what is it that would make scientists want to go to the moon, explore the ocean depths? What would make those colonists hundreds of years ago willing to risk the unknown in little wooden boats to sail out there somewhere beyond? We have a hunger to know. Every parent understands that when your child is first born, and your child then begins to develop to that place where it finally learns language, your child's first word besides mommy or daddy is usually no. And then your kid's second word is usually mine. And then your child's third word is usually why. And we've been asking why ever since. Why? Because we were designed to ask why. God wants us to hunger to know things. And parents, you know this is true. Either you put into your child's cup when your kid says why, or they will go take their cup elsewhere and fill it up with knowledge you probably don't want them to have yet. Where do jet airplanes come from and what makes them fly? How do cows make milk when they eat grass? Why do traffic lights turn red? How do elevators work? Where do babies come from? We want to know why. We were designed with a hunger to know. And why would God do that and make it such an important element in the human? Because God designed a material universe which reflects His incredible wisdom and glory. And He made us with the hunger to go explore it. Doesn't He tell us? It is my glory to conceal the matter, and your glory to go dig it up in what must be the big cosmic Easter egg hunt for truth. And why would God make us hunger for truth? Because He is the truth. And He also knows that there are many people on this planet, they will never open a Bible and look for Him there. They will never go to Bible college. They are not interested in religion or theology or God. But because they have a love for the sciences of the material world, their hunger to know will lead them back to the originator of material truth. That is God. Christians don't own all the truth, you know. We don't know everything. And the Bible, as much as it is a source of truth, it does not tell me everything that is true. Now let me make that clear again. The Bible is 100% the truth, but it doesn't tell me everything that's true. It does not tell me how aerodynamic lift works on the shape of an airplane wing to make that plane go up in the air and stay there for 15 hours as long as there's fuel to make it go forward. You don't have to be a Christian to be a good pilot, but you have to know the truth about aerodynamics. The Bible doesn't tell me about the way the moon affects the tides on the planet, but I'm glad that it's there. God put it there. The Bible doesn't tell me everything about human physiology and anatomy. I don't have to be a Christian to be a very good doctor, but I have to know the truth about anatomy, physiology, and biology. So Christians haven't sewn it all up in terms of truth. We have happened to agree with God about our condition, and the Bible tells me the truth about my fallen condition and how I can be reconciled to God in spite of it. God designed a bigger sphere of truth out there because He knew there would be people who would love the material world truth, but who would never look in the Bible for Him. Einstein made a very famous quote when he said, "Hey, I know there's a God out there. Mathematical precision in the universe demands an intelligent designer." The famous rocket scientist, Wernher von Braun, who left Nazi Germany and came to North America, he founded our national space program, NASA. I lived in Orlando, Florida. Before moving to Asia, I used to take my little girl out onto the front porch of our condo. We would watch the rockets be launched from the Space Cape. That's because of Mr. von Braun's contribution to the American space program. And Mr. von Braun, a wonderful rocket engineer, said this: I know that there's an intelligent creator simply by looking at a Swiss watch. That Swiss watch would never happen over the billions of years of random atoms coming together in space. It still isn't happening. There aren't Swiss watches spontaneously forming out there, or even little preludes to watches forming out there. A Swiss watch was designed by an intelligent creator who had a purpose and function in mind, and he crafted something for specific, precise function, and that designer also made it beautiful and put all that precise function in an aesthetic package, simply for the sake of a like of beauty. The point is, he said, a Swiss watch is far less complicated than one single living cell that can duplicate itself. See, that's why we hunger for truth. Truth takes us to God. We have our third appetite. We've been talking about it throughout our time together. We hunger for relationships in the soul. Money doesn't make you feel loved. That's why rich people are often neurotic if they don't feel loved, because their wealth won't fill up the empty place. Fame won't give it to you. Status won't give it to you. Achievement and a nice condo won't give it to you. The only thing that makes you feel secure is love, and the only way you get love is from relationships. Relationships nourish the soul. Let me give you an example that everybody can relate to. Remember Marilyn Monroe? Everybody knows who she was, who she still is. Man, she's got a pretty good income considering she's been dead over 30 years. Marilyn Monroe. She, the ultimate celebrity, not just sex symbol, typifies our interest in celebrities. Beyond what they wear and what they do and who they sleep with, there is a fascination with the celebrated human. And why? Marilyn sort of highlights this fact about the hunger of the soul and why we observe the lives of famous people. Marilyn began life as little Norma Jean Mortensen Baker. Her mother was unmarried and a film editor, ironically enough, at a major Hollywood studio. Her mother had to give the daughter 2 surnames because they weren't quite sure who the father was. This already was a foreshadow that things weren't going to go very well for little Norma Jean. Norma Jean, born into a home without a daddy. Norma Jean also grew up in a home without a mommy because her mommy, in early childhood, Norma Jean's mother, went crazy and had to be institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital. Norma Jean didn't have a mommy or a daddy, and hence the 2 most important bonds providing security were not there. Well, Norma Jean was shifted from one foster home to the next, and Norma Jean was molested and raped as she emerged into her teenage years. Her sense of womanhood was defiled and her boundaries were gone, and already she had a deficit to be loved that began to drive her, a hunger that could not be satisfied. She learned, even as a teenager, as her body went through its change at puberty, and she developed that famous figure that would later become part of her gold mine. She learned even before she was ever famous that she could turn all the heads of the boys in the neighborhood if she'd wear a sweater 2 sizes too small when she walked down the street. That was her own admission. There she had begun to craft a survival strategy through which she could obtain the interest of others and be the object of their affection. And you know, for a girl who was emotionally starving, a little bit of wrong attention was better than none at all. She finally got married to a policeman, and he loved her, but you know what? Norma Jean's enormous vacuum could not be satisfied now by a husband. Her vacuum was so big that he was basically consumed in it. She wanted more people to want her and love her, and her husband wasn't enough. She looked beyond him. She divorced him. She became a model. She became a starlet. She became a star. And even then, though she was worshipped as the ultimate symbol, not just of sexual allure, but of glamour and desirability. In fact, today's sex symbols are still compared to the era of before or after Marilyn Monroe, aren't they? Marilyn became a symbol of something more than just sexual appeal. She proves to us a lesson that many celebrities continue to prove to us, that in spite of all the best that the world could offer her, it didn't satisfy her deepest need. Fame and glory, worship and adulation, wealth and prestige and prominence even getting to sleep with some of the most potent symbols of masculinity in her generation. None of it filled her empty cup, because all of those strategies were not the right, healthy kinds of relationships that would have made her feel secure. And poor little Norma Jean became Marilyn Monroe, and she never found what she was looking for, and she died at the age of 36, her career in tatters, burned out and used up, never finding her cup filled up. That's why people resonate with Marilyn Monroe, because she is a symbol of much more than sexual allure. She typifies that all the best that the world can give you isn't enough, and that only that right order of loving God first and being in right relationship with others will put the soul at rest. Would you say that's true? No wonder people who are broken often idolize Marilyn Monroe. She speaks of something much deeper, and no wonder we continue to be fascinated by celebrities, because in the midst of having it all, they often have nothing. That brings us to the point here on this chart that every appetite can be counterfeited. Junk food for the body. How clever of humans to invent food that isn't. Convenient and popularized by the stars. Instantly, immediately available. You pop it open, guzzle it down, it tickles the palate and fills up the empty pit, but it doesn't nourish your body. How like humans to create food that isn't. You live on it long enough and it'll fill up your emptiness, but it won't nourish you, and you'll get sick if all you eat are candy bars, chips, and soda. They were never designed to meet your need. They were designed to take your disposable income by giving you the reward of temporary, sensual gratification. And then there's junk food in the area of our hunger to know truth. There are many ideologies and philosophies and religions which promise enlightenment, but they don't connect you to the creator of truth. They fill up your hunger to know, but you do not know the author of truth. So while you fill up thinking you become wise, the Bible says you become a fool instead. Knowledge alone doesn't do it. It's knowing the creator of truth. And then, in the area of the soul, it's quite evident. The junk food of the soul in terms of relationships would be emotional overattachments and sexually sinful relationships. Oh, they promise intimacy, and temporarily you can get it. Your empty cup can be filled up through immorality. It will provide a sense of well-being. It will make the hunger go away. But the longer you live on immorality, you will find that ultimately your deepest thirst is not satisfied. In fact, you are poisoned while you feast. Do you follow me? What is it then about right relationships that are so important? Let's take a look. If relationships are so important, why is it? Love is in the doing, not the feeling. If you love me, obey me. That's doing. Love your neighbor as yourself. That is treat others. It's a verb. Interact. Treat others as you would like to be treated. I cannot possibly feel emotional love for all of you like I feel it for my wife or my daughter. I would be emotionally exhausted all of the time if I had to love you all with feeling. But I can love you, that is, treat you in the way I would like to be treated, and so fulfill that attainable goal that is very realistic, isn't it? Love is in the doing. What is love? To me, it is these three things. They equal love in the doing. Let me explain this. Love, not a feeling, but a thing that we do. A healthy church, a healthy cell group, a healthy recovery group, a healthy home life. It will have these three things, or what it offers isn't enough, in my opinion. And since I have the microphone, I can say that. Now, love is always acceptance. Acceptance says, I value you so much that in spite of your human flaws and frailties, I still want a relationship with you. You belong, you are included. Wouldn't you say that is a sentence our own Father sums up in His Word? I love you. I do not overlook your weaknesses and your shortcomings. I love you in spite of them, and I will not reject you because of them. I want you. That's how much you matter to me. Yet I work with many adult Christians. They feel absolutely driven. They are not at rest because they do not feel the peace that comes from acceptance. And they still work so hard to be acceptable, to achieve acceptance. Hollywood knows how much you want to be accepted. So does the world of marketing and advertising. For example, Orchard Road in Singapore, 44 high-rise shopping complexes filled with merchandise that nobody on this planet needs. Now, don't misunderstand. I love Singapore. I prefer to live here. And, quite frankly, Orchard Road is good for the economy. It keeps people employed. But let me again underscore the fact that, God forbid, if Orchard Road should burn down tomorrow and every piece of merchandise was destroyed, there wouldn't be one thing missing that any of us would need to go on with our lives. There's nothing on that boulevard available to us that we need to be happy in life. Now, why is it then there's such a thriving market there? How is it that people spend their hard-earned disposable income on things they don't need? I'll tell you why. Because the world of advertisers understand that in affluent nations, you've got disposable income, and to get you to spend money on things you don't need, they've got to touch a raw nerve of the human soul and exploit it. And here's how they do it. You're wearing last year's color or style? I see. And that is enough to make you look at your wardrobe filled with clothing that is enough to last you till Jesus comes back. And it is enough to make you give it away or throw it away so that you go out and spend money on things that somebody else said that if you achieve and acquire this, you will increase your odds on acceptability. Am I right? Somebody made the rules up for this game that we play, and we are willing to play that game because we would rather spend our money than stand secure thinking this is perfectly fine for the next 20 years. But no, it's not. And I have to submit to the rules of the game or I'll lose out and won't be as acceptable. You drive a Honda, not a Merc? Pity. We would have invited you to the club. You wear a Timex, not a Rolex? What a shame. We are taught to envy. We are taught to be discontent. We are taught to strive to get better than that one so that people will look and admire what we've got because then we will be acceptable. Bad breath, body odor, dandruff, overweight, rejection. But our product can help you achieve the inner circle goal, that brass ring we all strive toward, acceptability. You see, the world of advertising understands, don't they? And what about Hollywood? Have you ever noticed the shows that are the most popular around the world? Regardless of the culture, they speak to human themes. Shows like Murphy Brown. Shows like MASH. Shows like Cheers. Why is it they're popular in Tokyo, London, Rio, LA, or here in Singapore? Why? Because they share this theme. Now, each of these shows has an ensemble cast, doesn't it? That means many actors working in a team, often in a community setting. The bar, the hospital, the office, the home. Even when they're in their personal homes, everybody's always there. Always a community of people interacting in a community setting, and each of the characters is a little bit twisted in their own little wonderful way, right? And doesn't each episode usually revolve around one of the characters whose mask has slipped and their weirdness is exposed and it's gotten them into trouble? And yet, in spite of their weirdness, doesn't the community rally behind them, not only accepting them, but bearing the burden to make the problem right? They all learn the lesson together as they work together as a community where they accept one another. No wonder the shows are popular, because they model what the church is supposed to be doing. Even the people of darkness, Jesus said, are wiser than the people of light, and we often don't get the point. That is how important acceptance is. And Jesus said, accept one another. It has nothing to do with whether you're weird. It has nothing to do with whether you've got problems to overcome. It has everything to do with, in spite of that, you belong, because you matter so much that I love you in spite of yourself. I think that it could be a quote from the Father. That's how much acceptance matters. And most of the people I work with, they have never felt accepted or acceptable. Now they need to get it. And a healthy church, a healthy cell group, and a healthy home will offer acceptance. Make sense? Secondly, accountability. That's the backbone of love. It says, I love you so much that I'm not going to let you damage yourself or other people. You know, when I get in trouble with God, it's not because maybe I didn't know something and I made an uninformed choice. So to speak, if you'll follow my analogy, I don't get in trouble with God when I spill the milk on the table. I don't get in trouble with God because I dropped something and broke it. I get in trouble with God when I say things that hurt other people. That's when God spanks me. He loves me enough to say, I'm not going to let you hurt somebody else. I get in trouble with God when I deliberately disobey and I do less than I should have. To him who knows to do good and he does not do it, it is sin. God loves me enough to say, no, you cannot eat 12 fudge brownies just because you're hungry and they are available. And if you do, I'll spank you. Isn't that how parents talk to children when they have no understanding that they can't eat 12 fudge brownies before dinner? I love you enough to tell you no because I know better than you do. I know more than you do. And you're just going to have to trust me. Because if you don't, we'll have a five-fingered discussion. Love has its limits because it is a fallen world. No, if you drive over the speed limit and I catch you, and you don't have to like it, but the law is there so that you do not increase your risks of an accident to hurt yourself or somebody else. You don't have to like it, but that's the way we play the game, and I've got the rule book in my hand, and I'm the boss, and I have the power to do it. Love has its limits. Now, some rules change, don't they? My little girl at 4, she wanted to drive a car. Well, of course, I told her that no, one day when you're old enough and you prove through testing and training that you have the ability to drive a car and you've got your own money to buy it, then you can enter the ranks of the luxury class and you can drive a vehicle. If you prove you can do it. But right now you may not. See, now she's under a restriction, but that will change provided that she matures. But in the similar way, some rules never change. It'll always be wrong to commit adultery. It is always wrong to have sex out of marriage because there are biological, sociological, psychological, personal, and social consequences. So there are always going to be limits. And God says he disciplines those whom he loves because he knows we can achieve a standard, and he wants us to strive toward it. Parents who never discipline their children, you know what they do? They transfer that obligation onto God. And when God has to train you, when God has to correct you, when God has to discipline you, it always hurts more. He has habits and ways of living and attitudinal blockages that have to be challenged and overcome. Does that make sense? So either we invest in our children by disciplining them to spare their souls, and we shouldn't like having to discipline. We're never going to feel good about it. We're never going to think, oh, this is wonderful, I'm glad I've done it, until later in retrospect we see the fruit of righteousness. God doesn't necessarily like to have to correct us, but God loves us enough to put up with our disliking the discipline. His shoulders are broad enough, his ego is secure enough, and his knowledge is great enough to know that discipline through mommy and daddy or by his spirit later will result in a good harvest. Even if we don't like it and we don't appreciate it and we get mad, he's willing to put up with it because he sees the bigger, better picture. The fruit of discipline is a life of self-control, respect toward others, a fear of God which keeps you from the snares of evil. And when parents do not invest discipline in their kids because they don't like having to run the risk of their kids being mad at them, then they set their children up where God has to later take over when it hurts so much more. So if we love somebody, we are a brother's keeper. We hold them accountable. One practical way this happens is when people do not know where to draw the limits and they want to overattach on you and literally drain your life, and you feel like the blood bank and they're the vampire, and you cringe every time you see them because you think, I've got no more blood left. And you get mad at them. And do you know why you get mad at them? Because you are expecting them to understand you have limits, and they're desperate and needy, and they don't respect your limits. You get frustrated because you think they should recognize that limit in your life. They don't, and you begin to reject them. That's not being a brother's keeper. A brother's keeper says, hey, did you know that the Bible says that you cross your neighbor's threshold too many times and it becomes like a curse? I think you're expecting more from me than I can give. I do not exist only to meet your need. Now, there may be softer, less direct ways of saying that, but when your brother doesn't know where to draw a line, you draw it for them. Isn't that what God does with us? Isn't that what parents do with children? Many of the people we work with, they do not know how to have accountability, and they need it in their lives to overcome their secret sins, which is why they bring their sins out into the opening, and we pray for one another after confessing our weaknesses that we can be healed. Healing is not just limited to the physical. It also includes emotional and relational healing, where boundaries are put intact, where they've been washed away, where we learn to operate within appropriate limits, where we've never operated within them before. We've either fled from people in fear, or we've overattached emotionally and physically. And now, through accountability, we can build in systems of limitation, where people can function in healthier relationships. That's part of the accountability of a family, a cell group, and a recovery group. I love and accept you, but now I want you to stop acting like a 3-year-old. I love and accept you, but now you can do better than that, and I want you to try. I won't give up on you. I'm not abandoning you. I'm not being harsh on you, but I am expecting you to deal with that because that's wrong. See? But you know, people will only take that kind of discipline when they really know that you love and accept them first. The ability to correct people is earned, isn't it? Finally, love is in affirmation. What does that big word mean? Affirmation simply means, you matter to me, and I'm going to prove it in the way I treat you. I treat you with respect. I treat you like I'd like to be treated. Okay, maybe you're wearing an outfit that I really can't stand, but you know what? I'll accept you because I know that there are probably times I wear things that push you over the edge. And added to that, I would want someone to affirm me, and I'll affirm you. I may not feel the freedom to say, oh, I think your outfit's really wonderful, but I might be able to say, I really do like you. Starving people, as over 65% of the world now lives in cities, and many more will move there, and they will be disenfranchised and disconnected, and they will find that all the material goodies of the world will still not fill up that empty place that God and others in healthy relating can. Do I make sense? This is a healthy church. This is a healthy recovery group. This is a healthy cell group. This is what it takes to help people get over their problems, in my opinion. And when we come back, we will talk about the application of this in recovery. What recovery is, what recovery is not, and how relationships work in making recovery effective. What is the role of the individual? What is the role of the church? This is the basic understanding and foundation we need